Welcome to the Bare Metal Cyber Audio Magazine. Each edition brings you sharp insights and fresh perspectives from the world of cybersecurity, straight to your ears. For more resources and content, visit baremetalcyber.com or cyberauthor.me. Let's dive in. Email is the oldest application most of us still use every single day. Yet we rarely stop to think about what that really means. Long before the web, before cloud computing, even before firewalls, email was already carrying messages across the internet. It was designed for an environment where users trusted one another and security was barely a consideration. Fast forward half a century, and that same design still sits at the core of global business, powering everything from contracts to invoices to executive communication. The uncomfortable truth is that email is not just another tool. It is an unpatchable legacy application, deeply embedded into modern life, yet never built for the risks we face today. This makes email both indispensable and indefensible. Every organization, from the smallest startup to the largest government agency, depends on it for daily operations. But unlike most applications, you don't fully control the other side of an email exchange. Your business is constantly talking to partners, vendors, clients, and strangers through the same inboxes. That universality is what makes email so valuable, but it is also what makes it such a perfect target. Attackers know that every company, every employee, and every executive must rely on it. And that makes it the one doorway they can count on being open. What we'll explore in this episode is why email continues to be such a persistent problem and why attempts to fix it never seem to hold. We'll look at the protocols frozen in time, the patchwork of security standards that don't quite solve the issue, and the critical workflows that keep us chained to the inbox. We'll also examine why adversaries love it, what practical defenses actually work, and how organizations must shift their mindset to treat email as the dangerous, critical system it really is. By the end, you'll see email not just as a convenience, but as the world's most enduring and exploitable legacy app. The story of email's insecurity begins with its birth in the 1970s, when the internet was a small research network connecting academics and scientists. Simplicity and openness were the guiding principles. The protocol that emerged, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, or SMTP, was designed to deliver messages reliably, not securely. It didn't ask who you were, it didn't verify your identity, and it didn't validate whether you had permission to send on behalf of someone else. It simply accepted a message and passed it along. As the years went on, POP and IMAP emerged to give users new ways to retrieve messages, and MIME was bolted on to allow attachments and formatting. Yet none of these enhancements addressed the core problem. Trust was assumed, not enforced. That design decision, frozen in the DNA of email, remains unchanged to this day, even as adversaries have turned it into a billion-dollar attack surface. As email spread beyond universities to governments, corporations, and eventually the general public, its vulnerabilities followed it. The same open architecture that once allowed scientists to collaborate freely now gave criminals and spammers an easy way in. Security was never part of the foundation, it was an afterthought. The culture of the early internet assumed good actors and low risk, a mindset completely misaligned with the realities of today's threat environment. Yet instead of being replaced with something stronger, email was entrenched. By the time the first firewalls appeared, email was already too essential to abandon. Businesses had built entire processes around it, and customers had made it their default form of communication. The insecure DNA was locked in, and any fixes would have to be layered on top, never baked in. That reality has profound consequences. Every time we talk about email security, what we are really talking about is compensating for the flaws of a decades-old protocol that was never designed for the modern world. You cannot rip out SMTP without breaking the global communication fabric, and you cannot simply patch it like an operating system. The bones are too brittle and the dependencies are too vast. What this means is that email will always remain partially insecure. No matter how much we filter, block, or encrypt, the foundational design remains one of open trust. For defenders, this creates an eternal challenge, protecting a system that by its very nature was never built to be protected. It is not just legacy technology, it is legacy thinking hardwired into the infrastructure of the Internet. The federated nature of email guarantees this inconsistency. Unlike a single application controlled by one company, email is a global ecosystem run by millions of independent operators. There is no central authority to enforce standards, no global mandate to patch and upgrade. A large enterprise might enforce DMARC at P=reject, while a small supplier runs a decade-old server with no protections. Yet those two organizations exchange messages daily, and the weaker one creates a risk for both. Attackers know this and constantly scan the ecosystem, looking for the lowest barrier to entry. Because email must interoperate with every other system in the world, defenders are forced to maintain compatibility with insecure peers. In practice, this means that even the most secure organizations are tethered to the least secure, dragged down by the weakest link in their supply chain. Encryption has long been touted as a solution, but it too stumbles on real-world complexity. End-to-end options like PGP and S/MIME have existed for decades, but adoption has always been hamstrung by usability. Managing keys, certificates, and interoperability across different platforms is simply too much friction for everyday users. Even when organizations deploy them, they tend to cover only a fraction of traffic, leaving the majority of email exposed. Meanwhile, backward compatibility locks administrators into insecure practices. Business partners demand weaker settings or non-encrypted mail flows to keep things working. The result is a lowest common denominator security model, where the strongest configurations are repeatedly sacrificed for the sake of compatibility. These limitations make email's patchwork of protections just that, a patchwork. Effective in pockets, but never comprehensive and never permanent. In the end, security remains a fragile overlay, not a property of the system itself. Email's insecurities would matter less if it weren't so central to the way business is run, but the truth is that entire organizations operate on top of inboxes. Password resets, purchase orders, invoices, contracts, and even legal notifications all travel through email. It has quietly evolved into the backbone of business logic, a system of record that executives, auditors, and regulators alike depend on. The irony is sharp. The most critical workflows often rely on a transport layer that predates cybersecurity itself. Enterprises treat email as an identity system, a notification system, and a transaction platform, even though it was never designed to be any of those things. This overloading of responsibility makes the inbox not just a communication tool, but a single point of failure for trust, finance, and compliance. No matter how advanced modern platforms become, email remains the lowest common denominator that ties it all together. Regulatory frameworks only tighten this bond. In industries like healthcare and finance, auditors and regulators specify email as the official channel for sensitive records, from HIPAA disclosures to SEC filings. Courts accept emailed communications as legally binding evidence, making them part of formal compliance obligations. Vendors reinforce this dependency by sending contracts, bids, and invoices exclusively through email, with no alternate systems offered. The result is a system where switching away from email is almost impossible. Even when organizations experiment with secure portals or specialized collaboration tools, email remains the fallback, universally accepted, universally accessible. Its universality is both strength and weakness. You don't need to be on the same platform to communicate, but that very openness ensures you are forever chained to an insecure foundation. Email isn't just convenient, it is codified into law and policy, making it far harder to dislodge. Infrastructure complicates the picture further. On one side, you have global enterprises migrating to cloud giants like Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace, consolidating into massive monocultures. On the other, countless smaller companies and government bodies still run legacy exchange servers, local POP mailboxes, or even custom-built solutions. The two worlds interact daily, exchanging contracts, invoices, and sensitive data. The weakest node in that chain becomes the adversary's best opportunity, and no organization can opt out. Even if you've moved entirely to a hardened cloud platform, you're still bound to partners and clients who haven't. Security teams inherit their risks simply by doing business with them. Cloud adoption solves operational headaches, but it doesn't change the federated reality. Email ties every company to the security posture of everyone else. Attempts to move away from this model often collapse under cultural resistance. Employees cling to their inboxes because it's what they know, and customers push back against new portals or authentication systems that add friction. Executives demand quick approvals, and vendors prefer email because it just works. When alternatives are forced, they often backfire, driving employees to shadow IT or insecure workarounds. Sensitive documents end up on personal accounts or share through unsanctioned channels. Instead of eliminating risk, the attempt to escape email sometimes magnifies it. The brutal reality is that email's role as a cultural, legal, and operational anchor means it cannot be replaced without breaking critical workflows. Organizations find themselves locked into running 21st century processes over a transport system built for a different century, one that attackers exploit daily. For attackers, email is the most reliable way into any organization because it was designed to be open, accessible, and universal. Business email compromise, or BEC, has evolved into a multi-billion-dollar industry by exploiting this reality. In its early days, it was crude, spoofed addresses and urgent wire transfer requests that fooled enough people to make the crime profitable. Today, BEC 3.0 looks much different. Attackers compromise legitimate accounts, steal OAuth tokens, and embed themselves into live conversations. They alter invoices mid-thread, reroute payroll deposits, or modify supplier bank details. To the victim, the email looks genuine, because in many cases it is. It's coming from a real account the adversary controls. The sophistication lies not in malware, but in subtle manipulation of trust. By turning email's openness against it, attackers have created one of the most damaging forms of cybercrime, requiring no exploit beyond a convincing message and good timing. Psychology plays as big a role as technology. Adversaries understand that urgency and authority are far more powerful than a malicious attachment. A two-line email that appears to come from the CEO asking for a quick favor can bypass every filter because it contains no suspicious payload. Employees respond not because they are careless, but because the message is crafted to short-circuit rational judgment. Attackers also lean on technical tricks like QR code phishing, HTML smuggling, and obfuscated links that slide past automated detection. But these are simply delivery vehicles for the real weapon, human instinct. People want to comply with superiors, meet deadlines, and follow routines, and attackers exploit those reflexes ruthlessly. Unlike software, people cannot be patched, and every organization's defenses ultimately hinge on the weakest moment of human decision-making. Attachments remain another perennial weapon, For decades, users have been trained to expect documents in their inbox, making email the perfect Trojan horse. The forms may change. Macro-enabled Word files gave way to ISO and IMG lures when macros were disabled, which later shifted to weaponized PDFs and secure links to cloud storage. But the strategy remains the same. Exploit the expectation that email equals document sharing. Even trusted services like Google Drive, Dropbox, or SharePoint have been co-opted, with adversaries embedding phishing kits or malware behind familiar logos. Each new adaptation reminds us that attackers don't need to invent new protocols. They only need to twist the workflows we already depend on. As long as invoices, contracts, and reports move through email, adversaries will weaponize them. The cycle never ends because the target isn't the file, it's the trust we place in the medium itself. Ultimately, email is the adversary's best user experience because it combines three unbeatable advantages: global reach, inherent trust, and human fallibility. An inbox is the one application every employee opens daily, often without suspicion. Messages arrive in the same interface whether they come from a trusted partner or a criminal syndicate, blurring lines that should be clear. Attackers exploit this familiarity, weaving financial pressure, authority cues, and urgency into their lures. A payroll change request just before month's end, a supplier invoice arriving minutes before a deadline, or a vendor compromise inserted into an ongoing negotiation. Each is designed to hit when defenses are down. Technical tools will catch some attempts, but email's universality ensures enough will always slip through. For adversaries, there is no need to find a new vector. Email already gives them the best stage, the best disguises, and the most reliable access to human targets. Defenders may never fully secure email, but they can make it harder for attackers to succeed. The first step is enforcing domain authentication with real teeth. Many organizations publish SPF and DKIM records, but stop short of DMARC enforcement, leaving their domains open to spoofing. Moving DMARC from monitor mode to P equals reject closes that gap and forces attackers to find another route. Pairing this with DMARC aggregate reports and TLS RPT feedback provides visibility into attempted abuse. Watching for lookalike or homoglyph domains adds another layer, catching adversaries who spin up near-identical addresses to trick employees. These measures aren't glamorous, but they dramatically cut down opportunistic spoofing, raising the cost of attack. In an ecosystem where attackers thrive on volume, making the job more expensive is often enough to push them elsewhere. Security here is about narrowing the playing field rather than trying to eliminate it entirely. Identity controls are equally critical. Many compromises still happen because organizations allow outdated access methods to linger. Legacy protocols like POP and IMAP, combined with basic authentication, give attackers a direct path around modern defenses. Disabling them is a quick win that removes entire categories of attacks. Beyond that, adopting phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication, such as FIDO2 or WebAuthn, prevents stolen passwords from being reused. It is also essential to stop using email itself as a recovery channel for MFA. If attackers can reset a secure login through the inbox they've already compromised, the entire security stack collapses. By separating authentication and recovery, organizations force adversaries to overcome multiple, distinct hurdles instead of exploiting a single weak point. Identity, more than any filtering system, is the new perimeter for email. Modern detection tools also reshape defenses. Traditional secure email gateways filter obvious spam and malware, but attackers have moved far beyond those tactics. API-driven email security platforms integrate directly with cloud mail services like Office 365 or Google Workspace, monitoring mailbox activity for signs of compromise. They can spot suspicious forwarding rules, unusual logins, or malicious OAuth apps with far greater visibility than perimeter filters. Isolation solutions add another layer, opening links and attachments in safe containers so users never interact with them directly. Organizations should also restrict which third-party applications can connect to mailboxes, since adversaries increasingly weaponize OAuth consent to gain persistence. When compromise does occur, automated systems that revoke risky tokens and reset credentials quickly prevent attackers from digging in. Together, these measures create a layered defense, forcing adversaries to evade multiple independent barriers. Still, the most decisive protections often come from changing business process, not technology. High-value workflows like vendor payments or payroll changes should not rely solely on email communication. Out-of-band verification, such as a phone call, a digitally signed request, or a multi-person approval chain, ensures that a convincing email cannot directly trigger financial loss. These requirements may feel like friction, but they are friction with purpose. They stop attackers from exploiting the single biggest flaw in email, the assumption that the inbox equals authority. By redesigning processes around verification, organizations shift the burden back onto the adversary, who must now compromise multiple systems and people instead of sending the single convincing message. The best control is often not a filter, but a workflow that refuses to trust email as the final word. Treating email as background plumbing is one of the most dangerous mistakes organizations make. It is not a neutral utility. It is a critical application exposed to the open internet every minute of every day. That means it must be operated with the same rigor as a core production system. Defining service-level objectives for mail flow, monitoring them continuously, and building runbooks for outages or attack waves are essential. During a phishing surge, for example, automated throttling or temporary circuit breakers can buy defenders time to respond. These are not luxuries. They are the operational muscles needed to keep email resilient. When an incident does strike, teams that have rehearsed specific email scenarios recover faster than those improvising under pressure. The mindset shift is simple but powerful. Treat email like the high-risk production system it actually is, not like background noise in the IT stack. Continuous monitoring inside the mailbox is just as important as perimeter filtering. Traditional spam filters and malware scanners only catch what comes in, but the real damage often happens after compromise. Attackers create forwarding rules, harvest sensitive threads, or use hijacked accounts to spread fraud. Monitoring for anomalous behaviors, sudden rule changes, impossible login locations, or unusual activity from VIP accounts can expose these intrusions quickly. Finance-related keyword monitoring for terms like wire transfer or bank update adds another layer of early detection. By treating each mailbox as an active environment rather than a passive inbox, defenders spot compromise in progress rather than months later. This vigilance turns email from a black hole into a monitored surface where malicious behavior leaves detectable traces. Logging and auditability transform response capabilities. Journaling every message, archiving in immutable storage, and collecting telemetry from mail transfer agents ensures organizations have an evidence trail when incidents unfold. DMARC reports, TLS-RPT data, and anomaly logs provide insight into attempted attacks and weak points in the ecosystem. Too often, enterprises overlook this until regulators or litigators demand proof, only to discover gaps they cannot close after the fact. Immutable records don't just aid investigations, they build trust with stakeholders and demonstrate compliance. Coupled with regular tabletop exercises focused on executive spoofing and business email compromise, these practices strengthen both technical defenses and human readiness. It is not enough to hope that filters will stop everything. Organizations must prepare for the day they don't. Finally, governance needs to catch up to the threat landscape. Technical tools may block many attacks, but only strong policies prevent email from triggering catastrophic actions. Dual approval requirements for wire transfers, vendor of record whitelists, and supplier kill switches give organizations levers to halt fraud even when inboxes are breached. These policies convert risky behaviors into controlled processes. For example, a supplier compromise doesn't have to equal financial loss if payment changes always require verification through another channel. Governance of this kind is not red tape. It is security codified into workflow. By embedding these checks into business routines, organizations can blunt the most dangerous consequences of email compromise. The result is not perfect safety. Email will never be that, but a hardened, managed environment where even successful intrusions fail to deliver catastrophic outcomes. Email will never stop being the backbone of digital communication, but its role must be reframed if organizations are to survive its risks. For too long, it has been treated as background infrastructure, a simple tool for sending and receiving messages. In reality, it is the world's most entrenched application, older than the web itself, and it carries business logic, identity, and financial transactions across its fragile rails. The temptation is always to believe that the next protocol, the next filter, or the next awareness campaign will finally fix it. But email cannot be fixed. It can only be managed. The wiser approach is to assume compromise, reduce the trust placed in the channel, and design processes that fail safely when attacks succeed. That means continuous monitoring, strong authentication, and rerouting sensitive workflows away from the inbox. It also means accepting that friction is not a flaw, but a defense. The legacy of email is both remarkable and dangerous. It has connected the world for half a century, surviving every technological shift while outliving most of the tools built alongside it. That endurance, however, comes with a price. Because email cannot be patched or replaced, it must be operated with the discipline of a critical, high-risk system. The question is not whether adversaries will target it, they always will, but whether their successes will cascade into disaster. By boxing in email's blast radius, organizations can continue to rely on it without being ruined by it. The inbox will never be safe, but it can be contained. The legacy of email, then, is not just communication. It is a lesson in resilience, adaptation, and the need to treat our oldest tools with the seriousness they demand. Thanks for listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Audio Newsletter. Stay sharp, stay secure, and explore more resources at baremetalcyber.com or cyberauthor.me.